Hello, I'm Victor Vogel. Over the course of 30 years of coaching leaders, you have to really be comfortable with your own leadership skin. Somewhere in the middle of my consulting career, I realized when employees come to you and complain about a leader, they expect you to do something. After all, you are the expert roaming the halls. This happened with one leader in particular that I was involved in helping to improve. Now, there is a catch. This leader wasn't a tyrant. He was basically a nice guy. He didn't yell and scream and throw things in meetings. It was obvious he listened to others, but he didn't hear them. After a morning of input from his staff, he would return to his office and distribute memos with instructions based on what he wanted to be done, much of which did not take into account what others had said. The environment was cold and lacked energy and creativity. Needless to say, business numbers were falling short of expected goals. Turnover was actually increasing. It was inching up. Wasn't out of control, but it was inching up. And people were waiting to race out the door versus putting the extra time in to improve their projects. You could see that at quitting time. I couldn't go anywhere in the building without someone coming to me and saying, "You have to do something." When I inquired about what the problems were, everyone basically said the same thing, that this leader did not allow them to suggest and implement what they thought would make the organization a better performer. After several water cooler meetings and a meeting in a place we dubbed the West Office, which was a small lounge just a few blocks west of the office building, it was clear these employees were reaching a level of frustration that was about to boil over. When I asked them if they had confronted the leader with their concerns, they said no. Why? Because he was so nice, they didn't want to hurt his feelings. In one of my conversations, a person said they attended the same church that this leader attended. They said he was a strong volunteer. He listened and heard his pastor and church leadership. He volunteered a lot and taught children's Bible classes as well as instructing small group biblical lectures. They said he was like two different people when he led the small group Bible classes versus his office meetings. When you're comfortable in your own leadership skin, it is because the experiences you have often give you insight as to possible actions that you can take to coach leaders. The leader's superiors had sent him to several leadership courses and were also starting to be uncomfortable with his lack of transferring what they thought he should have learned. Because I have been a leader and have faced criticism of my performance, I realize you have to think out of the box sometimes to help leaders attain what I call a wake up call. What was clear to me, because I had taken the time to listen to employees, is their desire for their leader to change was born out of concern, not out of an act of selfishness. Because I took the time to collect the data from employees, I knew this leader had exhibited the skills he learned in leadership courses in a different environment. So the task was to get him to recognize and accept that his office behavior was damaging his performance and demotivating his employees while not destroying his self esteem. It's at this point where information gained through experience over the years combines to create knowledge and wisdom that leads to creative solutions. There are so many organizations that simply take a problem like this and push it into a training program, assuming the person will transfer what he learned to the work environment. Sometimes you have to bring unconventional approaches to solutions. To do this, you have to be very comfortable in your own leadership skin. Queried the fellow church member employee a little more to gather information about their perception of the teacher's belief in the Bible. It was during this discussion, as we talked about leadership and biblical behavior, that I was struck with a solution that might help this leader. I knew I had to first convince the leader that his behavior was creating a toxic work environment. I knew from my experience the most successful way to do this was to generate data about the leader and the culture of the organization, which linked employees' concerns to a culture that was decreasing performance. After much time with the leader, I was comfortable the leader recognized the performance problem. His memos reflected his frustration with their performance in a curt and judgmental way that lacked human connection. But he was not connecting their lack of performance to them being disgruntled because the employees were actually hiding their dissatisfaction from the leader. The leader did not understand why employees were not performing to expectations. He did not recognize he was the source of poor performance. I knew I had to focus on something other than the leader and employees' frustrations. Here's where the unconventional proved successful. I decided to look up all the verses in the Bible that connected to reproof and discipline. These are behaviors both the leader and the employees avoided but were needed to move forward. It would take too much time to go to these verses, but it fell into three convenient groupings. One was the grouping of you as an individual should seek and want and desire reproof and discipline to learn and grow. The other is if you care about someone as an authority figure, you must feel the need to reproof and discipline so that person can learn and grow. And the third category, which surrounded those two and within the culture that they should happen, was to do this through grace and forgiveness and love. Now, I took these verses and I wrote a brief summary of this model and put these verses in a narrative form that listed various behaviors, which basically model the behaviors listed in Galatians 5:19 through 23, which is the fruit of the Spirit, and other books like Proverbs and Matthew. Briefly, I paraphrased some of these behaviors like forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control against some of the negative behaviors that were listed in verse 19. And that was things like hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy. And also listed some other verses from areas such as Proverbs and Matthew on topics like judging others. The 4-page narrative was an eye-opener for the leader, and he quickly wanted to know the source of these leadership guidelines. He wanted to know because it struck at his core belief system outside of work. I would not have known that without opening a candid dialogue with the employees, one of the most critical elements of effective leadership. He was surprised when I told him they were a compilation from the Bible. At this point, it didn't take much for me to convince him to start a deep look at the culture of his team, to include a 360-degree leadership assessment. It was a result of this analysis that was the genesis for a series of ongoing high-performance team sessions that helped the leader recognize his strengths and weaknesses, opened up communication between him and the employees, and for them to develop a high-performance culture. What was the end of the story? You guessed it. Higher performance, better morale, stronger motivation, more creativity, and we could go on and on. All this because to lead, you must feel comfortable in your own leadership skin. You get there by gaining information over time and combining that with failures and successes to build a knowledge and confidence.